Good afternoon, social workers in Minnesota. Thanks so much for being with us today. My name is Karen Goodenough. I'm Executive Director at NASW Minnesota, and I'm thrilled to be here today with my colleagues from our Social Policy Action Network, our SPAN committee, to share with you all the launch of our 2021 legislative agenda. So I'm going to do some quick introductions of who's here with us today, and throughout our session, they'll each get a chance to talk with you as well. So we have with us Beth Winterfeld. She's the chair of our SPAN committee. Beth, go ahead and wave. Thanks. We have Angelo Flowers, our board secretary and chair of our racial justice committee. Hello, Angelo. We have with us Jenny Arneson, our contract lobbyist who works with us and the Coalition of Licensed Social Workers. And we have Lisa Kiesel and Leora Effinger-Weintraub, who are both from St. Kate's and Mapping Social Justice. Lisa's a faculty member there, and Leora's an MSW student. So thanks so much for being with us, everyone, today. Our attendee list is growing, and I just want to reiterate for folks, if you missed it along the way, that we are recording this session, and it will be posted on our YouTube channel, so anyone who missed it today can hear all of this later. So as you all know, our legislative agenda has just launched, i.e. it was posted on our website this morning and was sent out over social media channels. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, that's because it wasn't out yet. So please, after today's session, pull it out, check it out. But what you'll hear today is a lot of the narrative of what's in there, how it got there, what we're planning to do about it. So to get us started off, I want to welcome Beth to talk with us about the purpose of our agenda.
Thank you, Karen. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. And it's just been really gratifying to work with the SPAN committee as well as Racial Justice Committee and board members to collaborate on the production of this agenda, which is very hot off the presses. So I'd like to tell you a little bit about the background. We had a lot of discussions around how we wanted our agenda to look, and it's been very typical for NASW Minnesota to highlight social justice priorities. So we went with that same format, but we made an intentional strategic decision to keep this kind of high level, more of a global sort of agenda that doesn't specifically list bills and specifically policies. And the reason for that is, we know with the last year, with everything that's been going on with racial equity and COVID and so forth, that things are just constantly changing. And so we didn't want to date ourselves by asking for a specific ask and listing bills, knowing that that's constantly fluid and changing. So we want this agenda to really be kind of a living document that serves as a foundation and a platform that then you will see SPAN and NASW Minnesota following through with specific action alert asks with bills and things grounded in this. But we really worked to develop an agenda that highlights the important issues of our day and that is also grounded in our code of ethics. So I think we can all speak to that as social workers, that this mirrors our code of ethics in a wide variety of ways. So the other thing about this agenda is that it functions as a tool. So one thing we do as social workers is that we provide education for our own members and for social workers across the state. So this is meant to be for all of us and all of our roles and capacities in the work that we do. There should be something that we can each tap into individually with our profession. It can be used for students. It can be used for policy professors to integrate it into their policy classes and so forth. It's also a really nice tool for any of us who want to reach out to legislators to just begin the conversation of, hey, this is what we're about. What do you think of this? So we can use it to build bridges and so forth. It also allows us, it kind of provides a filter for the daily news. So if you're like me and get up and read the paper or check the headlines on my phone and so forth, I can tell immediately like, oh, which one of these are probably in alignment with our agenda? And then it helps provide me personally and all of us as social workers some guidance moving forward about how to act. So again, it's meant to be a foundation. It's meant to launch discussion and critique. And you will hear more in our time together today about how that legislative agenda will be put into practice. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Beth. All right, I'm going to talk for just a couple minutes about who and what went into our agenda. And I know you're all just waiting, like, just tell us what's in the agenda. But we have to give you just a little backdrop because many folks ask us throughout the year, so how do you come up with these things? Who are you working with? Who are all the players at the table? And I want people to know that there are a lot of cooks in this kitchen. We get feedback from lots of folks and input from lots of folks as we put this together. So I just wanted to highlight a few of the main people at the table. So our SPAN committee, so this is a subset of our SPAN committee, our Social Policy Action Network, is our group of NASW members who want to be at the table and doing this policy work on behalf of NASW. And so that group is kind of the core to coming up with what's in the legislative agenda. This year, our new Racial Justice Committee, which, as I said, Angelo is co-chair of, had a big hand in giving feedback, in helping us align our priorities. You'll hear in a minute a new preamble that group has added to the agenda. So our Racial Justice Committee has had a really strong hand in it this year as well. And then our board. So the board of NASW of Minnesota has that overall sort of discretion for, they have to approve our legislative agenda basically, but they did have some opportunities to weigh in as well. We also had our new legislative consultant, which we're so excited to have Jenny at the table with us, but she really helped us to connect with legislators and start to partner with organizations and really helped us frame our thinking around the lay of the land for this session as well. And you'll hear that when she's talking about the budget in a little bit. We also have several coalition partners that we are a part of as an association. So basically, when you join NASW, you're also subsequently basically joining these other partner associations that we pay dues on behalf of our association so we can be a part of their work as well. So those include the Homes for All Coalition, the Mental Health Legislative Network, the Child Welfare Advocacy Coalition. There's a newer DHS Mental Health Services Improvement Work Group that I sit on, our Coalition of Licensed Social Workers, and that's the group that is several of our social work associations working together on issues for the workforce. Take Action Minnesota, and Mapping Social Justice. So those are, and that's just a handful of kind of our core groups that we're a part of. And each of our SPAN committee members takes basically a role in being our liaison to one or more of those coalition partners. So that's a really important job that they play as well. We have other issue collaborations that we work on every year that shift and change as the world evolves and things come up. And so I just want to highlight a couple of those that we're working on currently. One is we are working on the ban of conversion therapy in partnership with Outfront Minnesota, MSSA, and Justice Health. And there are some strategies that are a little outside the box happening this legislative session that we're working on with that group that I'm really excited about. The other I wanted to highlight is our Unity of Effort group, which Angelo is a member of, as well as our board chair, Jen Hamrick, on behalf of NASW. But we're working in partnership with the Black Social Work Association of Minnesota and the Hmong Social Work Coalition to work on all sorts of things collectively for the betterment of our social work workforce. But right now, we're specifically lifting up our concern about our licensure exams and the potential that they're limiting BIPOC folks from entering our profession. And so we have collectively are working toward urging our Board of Social Work to get ASWB to share exam demographics more openly and transparently as we work toward equity in our profession. So that's a very short of a very long, big thing that's happening. I'm happy to talk with anyone about that. It was highlighted in our recent member newsletter, and the letter that we shared with the board was linked in our newsletter as well. We're also working with NAMI and a couple of active NASW members related to some concerns about HPSP, the Health Professional Services Program. So you'll see that in our legislative agenda, but some of the things that you'll see in the agenda, as Beth was alluding to earlier, are not things that are going to be a specific policy gets lifted up at the legislature this session. Some things are we're working toward that, or we're laying some groundwork, we're making connections with legislators, or we're working with policy partners on the backdrop of an issue. So there's lots of sort of ways that we work through each of these issues. So that's just a little backdrop on how we get to this agenda that you see today. So with that, I want us to dive right into reviewing our legislative agenda for 2021. We're going to start with our preamble, and Angelo and Lisa are going to share a bit about how they got to this and what's in there. So take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. Again, thanks for being here with us today. My name is Angelo, and I am the board secretary and the chair of the Racial Justice Committee. And the work of the Racial Justice Committee is very important. As many of you know, there is still very deep-seated systemic racism and inequalities that disadvantage communities of color that are still woven into the fabric of our institutions today, from education and housing to our criminal legal system. And so not only did we feel that it was important to have inclusive language of all of the experiences and the traumas that have plagued communities of color, it was also important to have active language to move from this passive general language of admiring the problem to having language that provokes action to move toward a resolution. And so I'll let Lisa talk a little bit more about that.
Thank you, Angelo. Yes, indeed, very much wanting to demonstrate a commitment to action toward racial equity, not just talk about racial equity. This is certainly not new and not a surprise to many of you that this is an ongoing issue, but really hoping to move toward efforts to center concerns around racial and ethnic equity rather than have that be an afterthought or race-specific legislation policy. It's really centering this in all we do to bring a focus on racial equity in all policy and systems. With this, we're not alone. Many of you have probably noticed that your counties your counties or your cities may be developing some policy around racial equity impact, equity in all policy sort of propositions and seeking to live that out. We hope to see more and more of that and would love to hear your stories of experiences with that in your localities. As we continue to learn and grow as an organization in addressing this. We also know at our own state level that Senator Dibble has put forward a racial impact assessment process in a bill for consideration as our state policymakers in relationship within this legislation to the criminal justice system of recognizing racial impact, assessing racial impact. So that's a bill that's in play, and we don't know what will happen, but just that this effort is being reflected in different spheres. It's something very important to us, and keeping that commitment at the forefront of all we do in assessing, advising, and taking action. Thank you. I will pass it back to Karen.
All right. Thanks so much, Lisa and Angela. I think that's just a really important backdrop for everything people will hear going forward, and I think a really important addition to our framing as we're really screening and thinking about what policies we support in the future and how nuanced we want to be in making recommendations for change as well. At this time, I want to turn it over to Jenny Arneson, who will talk with us about taxes and spending, the first category of our legislative agenda. And I just want to note for folks that we will take some questions at the end of our session. We have some time scheduled for that. And so please just hold your questions to the end after we get through the general sense of each section. I'm sure there'll be questions along the way. And if you drop them in the chat, I will come back to them later in the session. All right, Jenny. Take it away.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, thanks, Karen. And thanks so much for being here. And I want to emphasize, too, that if you're really interested in policy or you just feel like you want to engage for the first time and need support, you are always welcome to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk you through that process. We are here to build advocacy and to have a stronger collective voice. So I do want to start with some context. I want to make sure this might be familiar to some of you, but I want to make sure we're all on the same page and have the same understanding on how the basic structure works. So our state government operates in 2-year cycles that we call a biennium. So the first year, they focus on setting a 2-year budget, and then the second year of the biennium is focused on policy issues and bonding. So currently, we're in the first year or a budget year. So it's constitutionally required that the state pass a balanced budget by the end of the session, which is in May. If they've not reached an agreement, they will have to continue meeting in special sessions called by the governor. We have a split House and Senate, and so this is happening more often than not lately. And in fact, it's happened 5 times since 2010. So this is a very common thing that is happening lately. Once it's passed, the budget will go into effect July 1st. If you don't know, the House and the governor's office is controlled by the DFL party, and the Senate is controlled by the Republicans. So given the enormity of this task of passing the budget and just the strong likelihood of disagreement, this is the central focus of the session. And this is really, they must have it, they must get this done, so it's taking precedent over every other issue. And so as such, taking a stance on taxes and the budget and spending is near the top of the agenda because we know it and will inform the rest of the other topics. So Karen, if you want to move to the next slide.
Sure.
Here, yeah, thank you. We're here in the, here I've laid out the state budget process. So currently, this is kind of a step-by-step of all the things that needs to happen before the end of May. So we're currently in step 2 of this process. Governor Walz released his initial budget at the end of January, and this defines his priorities and his approach to revenue. So he used the state's budget forecast, which was step 1, released on December 1st. And that projected a $1.3 billion shortfall for this biennium. So they're operating with the assumption that there will be a deficit, and that's the place they're starting. This is, though it sounds bad, it is actually better than was anticipated, and they do have a surplus for the remainder of this fiscal year. But we know this amount is going to change because the legislature has already passed some laws providing financial assistance for small businesses, and more federal dollars have entered into the state coffers. So the next step you will see that they will revise the budget, and we are all waiting for this to happen. Currently, so while we're waiting, between step 2 and step 4, or step 2 and 4, basically what's happening is House and Senate leaders are reacting and offering opinions. That's where we're at right now in the House and Senate. So we can move to the next slide. And that highlights, so I'm going to highlight a few things here that Governor Walz put in his budget. So this is, we know that these are his priorities. He's indicated his goals, and he has some very specific ideas that he's put forward in his budget. He's proposing that we raise revenue, and there's a few different ways he wants to do that. He would suggest a tax increase. He's focused on the highest earning wage earners in the state. Specifically, we're talking about married filers who earn over $1 million a year, and single filers who earn over $500,000 a year. He's talking about some corporate tax increases, capital gains, estate taxes, some cigarette and vapor tax increase. He'd also like to use, we do have a very healthy state reserve fund, which is basically the savings account of the state. And we have some savings from the Stadium Reserve, and he would suggest dipping into that to close some gaps. He'd like to invest in, he's a variety of suggestions for investment. He'd like to give a tax decrease to lower wage earners, including increasing the family working tax credit. His primary investment he's suggesting is in education, but he also has some other ideas like paid family medical leave, and then quite a bit of COVID support, which Beth is going to discuss in just a moment. Essentially, our NASW position is in line with this budget. We weren't specific, although we have, as we go through this budget, you'll hear ideas that we suggested as topics that we should invest in. But in general, our position is that we should not balance a budget using cuts, that we should make sure we maintain sufficient revenue so that we don't need to cut back services. And that's, in general, the position the governor has laid out in his budget. Democrats have indicated their general support for this idea as well, investing rather than cutting. But as expected, we certainly, Senate leaders, Republican leaders in particular, are quite vocal in their opposition, and they've been very clear that they are opposed to raising taxes of any kind. They are also very specific in saying that they are opposed to tax raises on corporations and capital gains, and that really they're citing the trickle-down theory for those who are familiar with it. They are concerned that if we raise taxes on corporations, they will simply pass on those expenses to consumers, and that they will it will increase their desire to leave the state of Minnesota and lead to unemployment. So that is going to be the fundamental debate between the Senate and the House. And the Republican leaders have been clear that they are going to start with a 5% cut in each department. So that's where the taxes and spending are on, but there is quite a bit of investment in COVID, and we want to call that out specifically. So Beth, if you wouldn't mind talking a little bit more about that.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Jenny. So as Jenny mentioned, if this is a tax and spending year, and we all know the disastrous impacts that COVID has had, of course, that's going to be a pretty significant economic chunk in our budget. And the lens that we bring as social workers with this legislative agenda is to make sure that our vulnerable populations, our people of color and so forth, are represented, and how this rolls out and how it becomes accessible to all people. So the question isn't so much whether COVID relief is going to happen. We know COVID relief is going to happen, but how and how much are really the questions that we need to be advocating for. So as soon as Jenny had said, it's important for all of us to reach all of our legislators, even though we might feel like we're preaching for the choir, just to kind of keep the content fresh in front of them, but actually strategically to find those Senate Republicans in leadership to do this advocacy, to advocate for the benefits of increasing revenue, so that we can begin to meet the needs sustainably of all populations in need, particularly those most vulnerably affected by COVID. So for those of you who are interested in specific bills at this time, and as we mentioned before, bills change, and if you attach yourself right now to a bill number, which I'm going to give you, you might find that bill changes into a different number. So it's very, it's difficult to navigate, but as Jenny mentioned, feel free to reach out to her, any of us, and many heads put together, we can maybe figure this out. So the largest effort currently is the COVID Economic Assistance Bill, which is House File 1. You can find the companion bill in the Senate. So this is just including extra funding for housing, extra MFIP payments, food, increased access to broadband. So some of those equity issues are embedded in that bill. Another bill addresses emergency sick leave for healthcare workers. That's House File 41, Senate File 331. And many of us are included in that category, plus many of our clients, of course. There's also emergency COVID human service funding, House File 42, that would align with our legislative agenda. Emergency service grant funding, which is House File 315. Both of those have companion bills, and that's always a good sign. And then there's some long-term care emergency housing and support, which is House File 3. And there's no companion bill yet, but things will change quickly, so stay tuned. I think that's it for me, Karen.
Great. Thanks so much, Beth. I think part of what you're hearing, folks in the audience, is that there's a lot of nuance to what's in our legislative agenda that allows us to sort of continue to follow and frame our thinking around bills as they transpire. So, and we'll talk in just a little bit about the tools to use to follow some of these things, and we'll give you some links and ways to follow them through us as well. So next up, we are going to be talking about reimagining community safety, the next section of our legislative agenda, with Leora. So take it away, Leora.
Thank you, Karen. So It's been just a joy working with this group, and not only on the overall legislative agenda, but we had a subgroup that was able to craft this section here, working with members of the Racial Justice Committee, board members, and fellow BIPOC members of our committee. This is, I think some really powerful material here. So one thing that we kind of started out with is noting that we have power individually and collectively to reimagine our current systems and to create a society that promotes true community safety. The word that really reverberates in my mind when I'm thinking of this power is transformative. And so a lot of what you're going to see is ways for us to try to transform our state and safety. Our goal is a society moving towards creative ideals of racial justice. As part of this work, we acknowledge social work's role in our society's current oppressive systems. It's really important to note that our history as a profession has included harm to BIPOC communities and to other folks who currently struggle under the oppression of our existing criminal justice systems. So in creating this section of our agenda, we were really guided by hope and aspiration. Part of that comes from the fact that we see a need for this work to be led by those most impacted by these systems. As a primarily white group of practitioners, our voices just aren't the most important in this discussion. Another part comes from the fact that these are not changes that can be implemented in one legislative session. This is big work, as we've already mentioned. There aren't necessarily a single bill to follow. This is big. Statewide legislation is not always the avenue for these types of radical changes, because every small and large community has a stake and may imagine community safety differently. At the local level, our cities and counties are doing the most impactful work. And so we call on social workers to connect with their local government to implement changes that collectively will transform our state. So our goals as outlined, Karen can switch to our next slide. Our goals include amplifying BIPOC voices and coalitions. It's really vital that we as social workers listen and help others listen to the voices of those most affected by these systems. We want to create supportive systems to respond, especially to nonviolent calls, and that could include domestic violence disputes, substance abuse, and mental health crises. Supporting communities and identifying needs that may include reallocation of funds to the goal of creating new resources for behavioral and physical health, domestic violence, housing, food, jobs, and other community needs. Establishing and funding community networks of support, and supporting calls for justice and accountability. This may include ending qualified immunity, among a diverse array of strategies. So really, when we looked at reimagining community safety, we wanted to note that this is not a Minneapolis or St. Paul issue. The kinds of harm and upheaval we saw last summer are happening throughout our state and have been historically, and unfortunately will probably will throughout into the future. Both large and small communities are seeing these impacts. So this is really a time for us to do the deep work of reckoning with how these systems hurt our fellow Minnesotans. As a professional and as individuals, we can play a significant role in that reimagining of community safety. And I'll turn it back over to Karen.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Leora. I just wanted to highlight also, folks, that our executive committee at NASW has had a recent conversation with our board briefly and is extending that into a meeting coming up here that will include some of our SPAN committee members and our racial justice committee members who want to continue this conversation about our responses to changing our policing and community safety systems in our state. And this is a very nuanced conversation, and we know there are lots of sides to it. There's lots of there's lots of realities that people are living in different places, and then there's also some baseline truths that are things that we're paying attention to as well. So I just want to say to folks that this conversation in particular is continuing to evolve. We don't know all the answers to all of the questions yet, because I don't think all of the questions have even been brought to the table yet. And so as they come up, then we will continue to do this work. But if anyone in our audience today is really passionate about these policies or any of the things we're talking about today, we really want to engage you as we go forward. So think about joining us as well. Our next section is on community mental health and family service equity. And this one I'll be talking about, actually the next two. These are a couple of the core chunks of policy that have been in our legislative agenda for a long time. This first one on community mental health and family service equity is really about working with folks and supporting folks who are living with mental health and substance use disorders, and making sure that we have the appropriate services and interventions in place to serve them well. So we talk about accessible and affordable behavioral health care, decreasing stigma, promoting telehealth and continuing to promote telehealth into the future, not just during this time of COVID, but also as a long-term permanent strategy that does work for some folks well. And we want to make sure that our providers are paid equitably and appropriately into the future for telehealth services as well. Our national office has been working on telehealth significantly as well on a national level. So just a side note on that one as well. And then all sorts of things related to well-being of communities of color, increasing kinship connections, and better serving young people in our child welfare system. This section also includes our condemnation of conversion therapy. And as I was talking about earlier, we're looking at both. Yes, there will be some bills that come forward potentially this session about conversion therapy. There's not been a great appetite for that on a statewide level in Minnesota, but there's some other strategies that we're tinkering with related to our licensing boards that we're also looking at. So more information will be coming out to all of you soon as we have some asks that we want you to weigh in on and calls to make and that sort of thing. The other and the final section of our legislative agenda is on licensing and workforce issues. And these are core to NASW because the reality is if social workers don't work on their own behalf, no one else is specifically working and looking out for our best interests. That is absolutely a role that NASW takes seriously. So in brief, from the description from our legislative agenda, social workers are essential. Bottom line, in all sorts of areas of practice. We know that it is our theme for Social Work Month in March, so we'll be talking more about what that looks like and how that unfolds for us. But in this section, we've added a bunch of things that actually have some legs, I would say. We have some folks outside of our social work community that are also very interested in investing in and growing opportunities for social workers. So one is on recruitment and development of a racially and culturally representative workforce, specifically in child welfare and more generally in social services. Also recruitment and development and retention of BIPOC social workers, and doing that through lots of means, but some of the ones we're looking at right now and investing some time and energy in are paid internships. And at NASW, we are putting our money where our mouth is, and we are budgeting for paid internships next year. So all of you in the audience looking for a great macro internship next year, I hope you'll be talking with me soon. We're talking seriously about loan forgiveness programs. Our national office has authored some really important communications that have gone out to lawmakers nationally on loan forgiveness, all sorts of things around supervision and culturally relevant licensing practices, and we work really closely with our licensing board on all of these things. There's some conversation that's been happening for many months now on continuing education requirements for social workers and other health-related licensed folks around cultural competence and racial equity. So we have currently our 2 hours of ethics we all need every 2 years. And for supervisors, we have 6 hours of supervision at required CEs. And what we're discussing is the addition of some CE requirements related to cultural competence and racial equity, and trying to do that not just for social workers, but for all health-related licensed folks. Right now, the number that's being kicked around is 6 hours potentially every 2 years, but we'll see how that shakes out in all of the conversations that go forward. We're also talking about basically advocating for social workers related to vaccination, as well as all the things we've been working on and will continue to work on in terms of pay equity and reasonable caseloads and fully funding our programs, our training programs for social workers as well. Oh, there's so much nuance in here. I'm going to jump down to HPSP. We talked about that earlier. So the Health Professional Services Program, which is meant to work with social workers and other health profession licensed folks to support them in their own mental health and chemical use and that sort of thing. And what we're finding is that their services are not especially in line with social work's values and practices, and especially best practices as they continue to evolve over the decades. And so we are working on some efforts to encourage some changes in practices there and additional oversight. And there are some mobility I don't want to say legislation, but there's some work toward mobility happening both at the state level and nationally. So some of you who are dual licensed in multiple states are finding that that's a lot of work to keep yourself licensed in multiple states, and a lot of cost to that, and a lot of requirements and paperwork and all of that. And so along with some other health licensing boards who also working in this direction, social workers across the country are working on some potential for some interstate compacts or other mobility efforts that might help folks in the future. So that's just some tidbits of our licensing and workforce things. Again, it's not, everything we've talked about today is not the only things we could work on, but it gives us sort of a slightly prioritized to-do list of all the things that we care about. And we all know that social workers care about lots of things. So part of the hard work that we do is winnowing it down to the things that we think are moving this year, the things that are core to what social workers need and need us to spend our time and energy on. I see there's lots of questions and comments coming into the chat. We will get to those in a bit, but thank you all for continuing to drop those in there, and we'll get to those in just a few minutes. For now, I'm going to pop it back over to Lisa and Leora, who are going to share some ideas for what to do next as you are all taking hold of our legislative agenda.
Thank you, Karen. So amplifying our collective voices is the first bullet you'll see here on this slide. And I think you've kind of heard that as a theme, particularly when we were talking about reimagining community safety. Our voices aren't the only voices out there. And so we really want to create more connections and amplify what others are having to say so that we can build stronger coalitions to do this work.
We also want to be able to take action. We want to take action collectively as an organization, but also for all of you to feel not only informed, but hopefully inspired by this agenda toward the action you may want to take. We, of course, none of us can do all of these things. None of us can solve all of these problems, but all of us can do something, and quite honestly, need to do something. We need to participate in our government, our agencies, our institutions to impact change. Change takes time, and so sort of digging in for the sustained path of continued engagement in the issues that really concern you and really make you interested and engaged in what we do in our profession. Our agenda reflects things that are statewide as well as really local concerns. As Leora highlighted in the reimagining section, that so many of those issues are related to local decision making and local bodies. And so we really would love for you to take away from this the values of social work reflected here that you can use to inform and highlight concerns in your community. We can also, through our continued work with SPAN, to seek to send out alerts and information to you about action that we would love to have you take part in doing with us. Be that emails to your legislators, attending a legislative session, etc. But we also would love that feedback loop from you about what is going on in your locality and how we can support that effort and also amplify, as Leora began with, what it is you're doing in your location. Leora.
So that really brings us to sharing our work, knowing that we're all doing a lot of different things. We're all have our hands in different pies, different work in our individual communities and elsewhere. Share with us what you're doing. Give us your stories. If you're creating briefs and action alerts, share those with us so that we can continue to amplify that and bring more voices and more action from throughout the state. Lisa?
And we want to be ready for all this action. We want you to be ready as well. That this is a great time to figure out who does represent you at all levels of government. In the chat, there'll be some links provided for how you can find out who represents you at the state level. And also, Google is your friend when you're trying to find who represents you at your city and your county. And truly, our cities and counties make a lot of decisions that impact our lives and the lives of those we serve. So get ready, put those numbers and emails into your phone so that when something happens, you don't have that who represents me question as a barrier to your action. Leora.
And lastly, reach out. Take this agenda that we're sharing with you and share it with other people. Highlight something from the agenda that really matters to you and just keep spreading the word. The more people that know about these priorities, the more people that can take action, and the more people that are ready for whatever next steps may come. Karen?
Awesome, thanks you two. I think we cannot say enough how important it is for each of us as social workers to do our own outreach to legislators individually. Legislators care what their constituents think. It's their job to listen to you. It is their job to work on your behalf. And so it is so important, like it matters when they hear from us collectively. When NASW sends them a note, a letter, and we meet with them, they care. But then what they really care about is when a handful of their constituents come to them and say, hey, we want you to do something about this. And so it's even better when social workers can reach out to their own legislators and say, hey, I'm Karen Goodenough. I am one of your constituents. I live in your area. I care about this issue, and I want you to do something about it. And that means more than anything I can say other, today. If you hear anything, it's an individual outreach to your own legislators makes a huge difference. So in the chat, we should have links for you for reaching out to your legislators, figuring out who they are if you're not sure. And then we really do urge you to set just a couple minutes aside and send a note to each of those folks. Now, I want to give you just a few ideas for how to engage with us sort of collectively as part of NASW. So first of all, for NASW members, we have a cool new tool. It's called Voter Voice. And when you go to our website, so it's NASW-MN at .socialworkers.org, you will find us if you Google us. Under the Advocacy tab, there's a section called Take Action, and it says in parentheses, members only. And so only members will be able to log in. You'll have to log into using your member credentials, and you'll get into that site. And using Voter Voice, we'll be able to share with you updates on lots of these issues that we're working on. You can look up your legislators. That is already working on there. And then there'll be all sorts of things for searching issues that you care about and that sort of thing. I also want to just one other thing that Leora and Lisa were talking about was sharing your work with us. So your legislative alerts, if you're doing any research on an issue for maybe your employer, maybe for a class you're doing or something, we really do want to hear those, and we want to receive them in real time. So they are timely and useful, and we can amplify what you've done. So instead of you writing it for one small audience, we'd love to amplify that and send it out to our membership. We can give you credit, or we don't have to. You don't have to put your name on it either. But we do have a little process for you to sign off and give us basically rights to your work so that we can share it with our members. And so just to put in your head that if you share anything with us, either through our admin email, Shireen can put in the chat, I think she already has a couple times, our admin email, or you can send them to me directly. We will use them as we're able to, and be able to use them in real time too. Jenny, do you want to talk a little bit about social media?
Yeah, I think, as Karen said, this is quite a lot to keep track of. So ultimately, our goal is for us to be in contact with you so we can be specific as things change and evolve over the next few months. A lot's going to change and evolve, and it's a lot to track. So we want to be able to tell you this thing is happening tomorrow, and we want you to know about it, right? So the tool is great. And another way we do that is through social media. If you're a fan of social media, particularly Facebook, you can look up NASW Minnesota, NASW-MN, and we regularly post action alerts on social media.
Great. We also have Instagram and Twitter, and we have a YouTube channel where we put all of our free stuff like this. And so Shireen will go ahead and put those links into the chat for you as well, so you can make sure you're following us there. We do share a lot of the action alerts, both from our national office and for local issues on our Facebook page. So we find that people really appreciate hearing what's happening nationally as well. And so you'll get a lot of that if you're a friend of ours on Facebook. We also have a monthly newsletter that goes out to all of our members. So for any of you in the audience who are our members, but you're not receiving our newsletter, I have a couple little tips for you. I first want to say that you'll know you're not receiving the newsletter because you haven't heard an update from the SPAN committee, or you haven't heard an update from our racial justice committee. Those kinds of updates are all in our chapter newsletter that comes out once a month. And if you're not getting those, make sure that you check your member profile on socialworkers.org and our national association. Make sure that you've clicked to allow our state chapter to send you messages. That's a communications protocol that's actually part of federal law. And so you have to check that you want to receive stuff from us, and then we'll send it to you. You can also email our chapter office, and Shireen will put the admin email into the chat, and she'll make sure to update you with constant contact. It's also possible that at some point you clicked, I don't want to receive messages anymore, and then you don't get anything from us anymore. So be careful when you opt out of things along the way too. Okay, that said, I want to turn it over to Beth to talk with you just a little bit about our SPAN committee and see if folks might want to join us.
Yes, thanks, Karen. I'll keep it brief because I know we need to have time for questions. Our SPAN committee is open and you can join at any point. And you can join with any level of awareness about policy. So we have an understanding that there's no such thing as a silly question. So there's room for people who are just at the very beginning or want to dip their toes in policy and this sort of advocacy work, and we make space in the meetings for our own internal committee education. So our meetings are currently meeting on the third Wednesday of every month. So our next one is February 17th at 8 a.m. We're meeting virtually. We have around a dozen really active participants. So I think meetings have been fun and have generated just a lot of great activity and conversation where we get a lot done in 90 minutes, and we have lots of committee members who are working outside of that time. Having said that, if you just want to be a participant just so you listen in and learn, that's fine too. So let Karen or the office or me or Jenny or any of these people know, and we'll get you connected there. Just very briefly, this was kind of the first big accomplishment of this year for SPAN to collaborate on our legislative agenda. Our next focus will be continuing kind of the day-to-day take action steps to get this out into our hands of our members and so forth. We have Social Work Day at the Capitol, Online Advocacy Day coming up April 14th that we will be organizing. At the end of our session, we'll be having a legislative debrief session, probably much like this. So yes, feel free to reach out with any questions, and everybody's welcome. Thank you.
There was one question in the chat. Someone was asking, how do I join SPAN? You got the whole answer there. And Shireen put in the chat the admin email address. That's the easiest way. If you know for sure SPAN is the committee you want to join, just send a quick email to that admin .NASW-MN at socialworkers.org, and Shireen will get you on the committee roster, and Beth will start sending you information. So we'd love to have you join us. Just a couple of other quick notes. One is that the National NASW office puts out a federal blueprint for social policy priorities at the federal level each year, and the 2021 blueprint just came out. It is based on the 21 the 21 issue areas are organized around the grand challenges of social work. I should say it that way. So if anyone is familiar with those grand challenges, I think it's lovely that we keep coming back to them because we have not fixed them yet. And so we have a lot of work to do. So check out that blueprint. Shireen will put the link to that in the chat. But that's a really great sort of guideline and framing for some of those big national issues that are being worked on as well through NASW. And with that, my final pitch is please join. Please join NASW and stay a member. We are working every day on behalf of social workers, both nationally and at the state level, and we can only do that if all of you continue to be members of ours. It's sort of like I don't know, public radio or any of the other things where you have to join, and then it's able to be strong, and then you get to reap the benefits of that. And so we will grow and be stronger if all of our social workers in Minnesota are part of the work alongside of us. So with that, we have lots of questions in the chat. I have my contact information up here and our website if you want more information, but let's just dive into a few of the questions from our audience for today.
KG, before we...
Yeah, Angelo?
I just wanted to piggyback off of them joining the NASW. So Karen did allude to, our current membership, and right now our current membership is only representative of a small percentage of the social workers that's in our state. And as the premier organization and the Professional Association for Social Workers, it is important for our membership to reflect the views, the practices, and the demographics of all social workers. Diverse organizations are more successful in recruiting and retaining talent. An inclusive environment is especially important for BIPOC individuals. And so when members feel both included and that the organization supports diversity, they report experiencing trust and increased engagement. And so to arc back to our earlier conversation and our goal to transform and reimagine our communities by amplifying our collective voices, I would love to have those of you who are not yet members join us in our work to establish an anti-racist Minnesota and disabling and dismantling systems of oppression, including those perpetuated by social workers. And the Racial Justice Committee is also open. We would love to have you work. I actually have some subcommittees of that committee as well. And so there's a lot of work to do, and we would love to have you join us in this fight for racial equality.
Thanks so much, Angelo. I really appreciate that, and I appreciate you chiming in. I asked Angelo to, if you had anything to say about people joining when we got there, and then I forgot to call you out. So thank you for that. Just a side note, Shireen did put in the chat also that we're taking nominations for our board and other chapter leadership positions that are really important. So if anyone has some extra time and wants to engage in the chapter in other ways, we would love to have more nominations for our board and some of these other leadership positions that you'll see in that tool. So with that, we're going to move to some Q&A. So we have a couple of quick questions and then a couple of little deeper things so far. And other audience members, if you have other things you want to chime in with, please go ahead and put them in the chat. One of the first questions came in early, Jenny, when you were talking about the budget, and it said, what happened in 2010 that sparked the extension of budget sessions/decisions? Was that really the having a divided House and Senate, or was there something else?
Well, I would need to look it up. I think the point is that over time, and the overall point is in recent history that we do. Minnesota right now, just coincidentally, if you don't know, is the only state in the nation that has a divided House and state. Minnesota tends to kind of historically have that division, whereas other states tend to be kind of like a one-party dominant. And so, of course, there's less disagreement. So I think if you look historically, yes, there has been. I don't honestly remember specifically what kicked that off in 2010, but that wasn't the first time as well. I think it's we've had 8 or 10 since 2000 or something like that. So I think it's just in general, the more kind of views at the table, the longer it takes to get an agreement.
Yep, absolutely. Jenny, can you just share with people the exact how we're split right now?
Yep. So if you didn't hear me say, the Democrats are controlling the governor's office and the House, and the Republicans are controlling the Senate.
So when we say a divided leadership, that's what we're talking about. All right, thanks so much.
And
there was a question. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just want to say the House leader, the Senate leader is Paul Gazelka, who represents the Brainerd area, and the House leader is Melissa. He's a Republican, and the House leader is Melissa Hortman, who's a Democrat, and she's in the kind of northern suburbs area.
Great. Thanks, Jenny. Okay, in terms of, let's see, another quick question came in from Mary. What's the Senate file bill number for Dibble's racial equity assessment? Do you have that one handy, Jenny, that you could look up?
I do. Lisa might have it too.
This is Lisa. It's Senate file 341.
Thank you. All right. So this question comes in from Lindsay, and we're talking about, Leora, about policing and issues related to that. It says support for ending qualified immunity for police is closely tied to ending qualified immunity for CPS social workers. Is that something NASW supports? And Leora, Lisa, Angelo, folks who've been a part of those conversations, have we dove into that nuance of it yet?
I do not recall our diving into that aspect.
Okay.
No.
Okay. So that said, I take that as a hint that we'll jot that one down, Lindsay, and make sure that our group that's continuing that conversation will dive a little more deeply into that. And the other note here, folks, is NASW is all of you who are NASW members. And so when people say to me, does NASW support that? I say, are you an NASW member? And they say yes. And I say, what do you think? Should we support that? Because that's how we come to our consensus. So we have some guiding documents. We have ideas from our national office that come out. We have Social Work Speaks. This is actually the old one, but it's all of our policy statements on all sorts of things. But there's so much nuance that we can't ever have a statement on everything. And so we do need social workers to weigh in and let us know, is there an opinion we should have on something that is important for the profession to be clear on. So Lindsay, feel free to join SPAN as well, or just specifically this conversation in our Racial Justice Committee. L'Oreal asks, what can BSW students do right now to help this agenda and stay involved in this conversation? Lisa and Leora, do you want to take that one back from our conversation a little bit earlier? What do you want BSW students to do right now?
I think one really natural step from this presentation is to look at this agenda, identify for yourself what your priorities are, and decide to share that with your legislators. To reach out with an email, a phone call, and share with them what the positions are that you're concerned about, and seek their help around those issues. This is a great time to make those connections. Again, I'll just reference that change takes time, and it may not be this session. It may be next session or the session after that, but we begin the conversations and we begin to raise our voice so our legislators know that there are people who are active and concerned. And I think it's excellent as a BSW entering social worker to start this habit in your professional career and encourage your colleagues as well.
And if any of you are really passionate about those relationships with legislators and figuring out who our friends are and making friends for us, we also have a PACE committee that does candidate endorsements on behalf of NASW, and we love to have some new members of that committee, especially outside the Twin City area and BIPOC folks. So if you want to interview candidates for office and help decide if they align with us and start that friendship with us, we'd love to have you doing that work as well. All right, thanks for that. There's a couple other questions. We'll just go a couple minutes over. Those of you who do have to leave, I want you to know that we're recording the whole session, so if you've missed anything, you'll see it in the recording. And also there's one CEU available for today's session, and Shireen will be sending that out to folks as well. Question about, has there been any advocacy around social workers receiving the COVID vaccine? This person specifically works in county child welfare, and they have not been prioritized for the vaccine despite doing in-person work throughout the pandemic. This is absolutely a problem, Erin, but it's also, from what I'm hearing from our social work partners and our other associations, as well as our members, is for the most part, social workers are being prioritized based on the priority rollout that our Minnesota Department of Health has decided on. And so if your organization is a healthcare organization, you are likely being prioritized right alongside with everyone else who was in that 1A and 1B categories. I think as we get down into more depth of getting down to the second steps and the third steps, and we're trying to make sure that social workers in every area of practice are prioritized, I need to hear from you folks, and we can absolutely continue to do advocacy on that. What's happening in Minnesota, however, like the voices that are most strong are at the table with our state health department talking about this, and every one of our counties is absolutely part of that conversation. The trickle down of that in terms of how they're prioritizing you within the county structure, I think is part of the nuance and difficulty there. So I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone individually who wants to talk about how social workers are being prioritized in your area, and we're happy to do some advocacy on your behalf as well.
And I would like to add something there too,
Please do, Angelo.
if you don't mind. Erin, yes, that is something that we support. In fact, the very last addition, modification to our legislative agenda was to add language in to support policies that advocate for the general health and safety of social workers, including free and speedy distribution of COVID-19 vaccinations. So yes, we do support that.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Okay, and last but not least, question in the queue at the moment is from Mary, and it says, if a member has another issue we'd like SPAN to consider, what is the best way for us to get it on the agenda for discussion? And to that, do NASW chapters ever issue policy statements on our own? Her example is medical aid in dying legislation. So the quick answer is absolutely, Mary, and everyone else in the audience. If you have an issue that is important to you, you're an NASW member and you want to see it on our legislative agenda, you just have to reach out and let us know. The decisions are made by those who show up in this group. So you can email it to the chapter office, to the admin email, you can email it to me, you can reach out to Beth or Jenny as you see them in other circles as well, and put a bug in our ear and let us know this is something that we care about. But what I have to say too is that the issues that we follow most and those coalition partners that we are active in, we're only able to do as much as our SPAN membership allows. So I can't go to all of our coalition partner meetings. There's absolutely not enough time in any one person's job to do that. And so we split that effort out. And so recently I had a couple of members come to me who are really passionate about aging issues and COVID and aging and just all sorts of things related to aging. And I said, that's great. They're not super strong in our legislative agenda because we've not had people at the table who want to tackle those issues and be our advocate and our voice who's working on those things. So if you're interested in that or any other issue, we'd love to have you bring a draft of a policy statement to the table. We can draft our own policy statements as a chapter. We can also lift them up to the national office for national policy statements if they're needed. If there's something that's missing from Social Work Speaks, NASW puts that together as well. I also want to say that we have 3 openings currently for delegates for our National Delegate Assembly. So if you're an NASW member who's passionate about what policies are in Social Work Speaks, what content's in our Code of Ethics, those sorts of big picture things, I would love to talk with you about being one of our delegates and at the table where those big decisions are being made.
Karen, can I just add something to that last?
Yeah, go ahead, Jenny.
Okay? So yeah, everything you said, for sure. And I just kind of want to point out that if they, in addition to contacting us about an issue that matters to you, this is a perfect opportunity to engage with your own representative. Right? Like, so you can, it's a both and. You absolutely can write an email to or call and say, I'm a social worker, I live here, and this is what matters to me, and here's why, and I'm wondering if you thought about it. And you can also be a resource for that person too, right? Like, but state representatives, senators, they're not experts in these issues, and they do rely. So it's on others. So you can say, I know something about this issue, and I'd like to, make sure you know about it. So it's a both and then you can also come to us and say, I've already had this conversation, and I'm interested in taking this further, because I know I have at least one person who is at least interested in talking about it. Thanks.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Jenny. The last question in the chat is related to our Social Work Advocacy Day. So some of you have asked along the way, or you've heard us talk about Social Work Day at the Capitol, which we have now billed as Social Work Online Advocacy Day. Okay, that's what it was last year in light of COVID. That's what it's going to be this year on April 14th, 9 to noon. Mark your calendars, people. our vision in the future is that it's likely a hybrid kind of event where we do that morning didactic session, that 9 to noon time, on a day outside of our regular day at the Capitol, where everyone across the state can all jump on remotely and hear our speakers and be a part of the conversation. That fixes the problem that we've had for years, which is we have to charge for Day at the Capitol because we have this huge venue that we have to pay for in order to have our over 1,000 people join us for it. Side note, we're one of the biggest social work days at the Capitol in the country. But we've learned last year in light of COVID that it works really well to do that part online. And so we've decided we're going to continue to do it that way, which allows us to provide Social Work Day at the Capitol free for any practitioners and students who want to attend. And then we will have, when we're able to again, we will have some time during maybe that same week or a week later where we do a rally at the Capitol and organize meetings with legislators. For this year, our SPAN committee will be diving into, in the next few weeks, we'll be diving into some of the framing for this year's day and how we may or may not do those legislator meetings. We have not decided. The actual question was, are we going to have student liaisons for Social Work Day at the Capitol? And we didn't last year because we didn't have an in-person event and didn't need the physical people to help organize everyone. But in the future, I'm not saying for sure, but we haven't decided yet is probably the quick answer to it. So with that, I don't see any other questions in the chat. I really appreciate people sticking around a little bit longer and having this time committed to hearing a little bit about what's on our agenda for this year and what issues we're already off and running working on. And I hope that you all will join us in doing the work and join us for Social Work Advocacy Day, at which time we'll have lots of updates and let you know where things are at. You know, that's a couple months from now. Things will be significantly different by that point. So we look forward to updating folks and doing some action at that point that is closer to when decisions will be made toward the end of the legislative session. So with that, thanks so much for being here. Shireen did say in the chat that your CEU evaluation and recording link will come by the end of the week, so everyone can look for that. Thanks so much, social workers, and take care of yourselves.